Let's go ahead. Let's go ahead and call the meeting to order at 7:00 p.m. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
May I have a motion to approve tonight's agenda?
I move to approve the agenda as presented.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. The agenda is approved. Tonight we have Angie Sanchez from FCS here to present on the wastewater rate study.
Yes, so good evening. My name is Angie Sanchez Bernache, and I am with FCS Group. We are a consulting firm who work with municipal utilities on utility rates, cost of service, financial planning. So over the last couple of months, we started earlier this year, we have been working with staff to compile a number of different items for review, and in particular for the wastewater utility, because you are looking towards some significant capital increases that are mainly regulatory driven. And so the question becomes, well, how do we navigate this? How do we take these costs? How do we meet our regulatory requirements as well as balance the financial impacts to our customers and our community? And so that really was the focus of this particular rate study in terms of, again, we were hired to do a 20-year plan. So again, we don't like to look just budget year by budget year. We're really trying to look at a multi-year plan to begin to identify where are you today in terms of that wastewater utility and what are we looking for in terms of the future? And then how do we make the best decisions possible? How do we inform council enough to be able to make the most informed decisions possible for the community? And so tonight, we'll focus on some of the key data inputs and assumptions that go into the financial plan. Talk a little bit about the costs in terms of the timing of when these various different costs are going to come in. Talk a little bit about where you are today in terms of rates. And then if we were to implement these various different rate increases that we may be looking at, what does that mean in terms of rates, in terms of that single family bill, in terms of the actual overall rates, in terms of the base charges and the usage charges, et cetera. So in terms of the financial plan overview, if you all have not been involved in a rate study before, really, again, what we're looking at is we're trying to determine what the overall financial requirements are for the utility. And each of your utility rates, it's really important that it's self-sustaining. So we shouldn't be, having the water utilities cover costs that the water utility doesn't have and, a number of different things. We really need to say, let's in isolation identify what are the wastewater utility financial obligations that we have. And those obligations can be operating and maintenance. It can be capital requirements. It can be existing debt service. But there's also some indirect costs that we need to be considering, which is fiscal policies. And so we also, when we go into this, we want to make sure that you're maintaining appropriate reserves. So again, you can weather some of the storms. So again, if your costs come in that you weren't expecting, doesn't mean you may necessarily have to take rate action. Perhaps you have an appropriate reserve to kind of ride that wave if it's just a one-time wave. Similarly for capital, do we have any capital contingency type of costs out there? Again, bids are coming in a little bit higher. We want to make sure that we're not really, living and dying on this specific number, that we actually have some room to ebb and flow with the overall costs that we're seeing. So we look at direct costs as well as operating costs, debt service costs, that kind of thing, but we're also looking at indirect policy type of costs and if this utility is meeting those various different needs. As we noted before, the capital funding plan is related but separate. So because capital costs can have such a significant impact on your utilities, they're usually one of the larger costs that we face. We kind of look at them separately and say, well, when we're looking at this 20-year plan, what are the overall obligations that we have for this particular wastewater utility? Not only to meet regulatory requirements, do we have any growth related needs in there? Are we repairing and replacing our system appropriately? And so we do work with staff. We work with a number of your comp plans that you have out there to really identify and get a handle of what are those obligations that we need to be funding. And sometimes what that means is it means that we're going to have to prioritize things, right? So maybe we can't do everything all at once. We might have to prioritize different things. And so that's why we really do rely on the community and the staff in terms of, understanding their systems to identify, if we have to push something out, what does that mean? And are we making sure that we're not going to put something in jeopardy, health, safety, et cetera. So we always have to balance those things out. But there sometimes is a need for timing and prioritization. And overall, also what we're looking at is what other funding sources do you have? So when we look at your capital plan, we're saying, okay, well, what comes in from rates that can help support these particular capital projects? What comes in from your existing reserve levels that you have? And is there any other funding that we can have before we then look out to debt service or to debt in order to pay for these? And we're going to have a couple slides in here. The city has done a really good job of securing external funding for this wastewater utility capital that's coming up. But again, overall, the objective is evaluate the sufficiency of the current rates on a self-supporting basis. So again, do our rates, our sewer rates support the overall obligations that that sewer utility has to be able to fund? And the overall goal, again, annual rate implementation that balances those needs. We have these financial obligations, but we also have the community to answer to. And so how do we strike that balance? In terms of some of the key assumptions that we use, and so we have this very detailed spreadsheet. The staff has, used it. We're actually going to turn it over to staff, so you'll have a tool set to be able to use and update as you go out over time. But it's a very detailed spreadsheet that, again, really builds on this 20-year plan. We're going to be focusing on the 2025 to 2030 time period when we're looking at rates. We do use budget figures to begin our assumptions in terms of where that jumping off point. So we use an approved budget to do that. And then we apply various different escalation factors in order to get to and fill out that 20-year plan. Those escalation factors can range from 3 to 4% in terms of what is that annual cost increase that we need to be planning for in order to meet our overall obligations. And so again, we reviewed that information with staff. When we talk about our operating reserve targets, we have set a 90-day of operating expenses for our wastewater utility. That means about 240 to about 364 in terms of that reserve that we have available to meet our unanticipated needs or just the ebbs and flows in our cash flow. We have about a 1.3% annual growth rate. That is when in some of the plans that we had in terms of the wastewater system facilities plan population growth. And so that's kind of where we had that. It's about 16 to 17 new units per year. And so again, when we look at our revenue, we will grow at 1.3% per year to say just as a sheer factor of growth where our revenue will be increasing because of that. When we look at that, those annual revenues, they're bringing in about $1 million to about $1.1 million per year. And that's kind of in that green box there. When we look at our operating expenses, again, we're looking at that budget jumping off for the 3 to 4% per year, depending on the actual line item budget. So we go through each of your line items of the budget and say, okay, should this one get a general inflation? Should this get labor? Should this get benefits? How do we escalate that cost? Well, one of the other additions that's not included in the budget is some additional O&M for the new facility. And those particular O&M costs are about $293,000 per year. Again, they're going to be increasing with inflation, and they begin in about the year 2028. So again, that's why we take this long look, because we don't want to set things today. If we know something's going to be coming up, how do we plan for that? There's also, because of some of the funding that you're getting, there is a debt reserve that is required to be funded. That can be funded over a 10-year time frame. And so that's about $330,000 per year, again, starting in 2028 that we have to include in there. In terms of existing debt service, your average is about $146,000 per year. And so any new debt that we have will be on top of that particular existing debt service, but that's an obligation. So we want to make sure to look at that. And when we look at the capital plan, as we noted, that's really where our dollars come in for that time period, 24 to 2030, it's about $28.7 million. Okay, we do also increase to the year of construction. So if we have a cost that is in 2024 dollars and it's not going to happen until 2028, we actually apply an escalation so that we have enough cash during that 2028 time period to fund that. So those are some of the key assumptions that we have going into that wastewater plan. Now we look at the specifics, a little bit more specifics of that capital improvement project for the, out through the year 2030. You can see there at the very top of that table, it kind of lists the big bullet wastewater treatment plant costs, and it has about 4 lines below that. Those particular costs, 18.2 along to about 4.2 million, is about 25.5 million in wastewater treatment plant costs that we are anticipating for the wastewater utility. Pretty significant number that really is highly driven by regulatory requirements. And so many times you can't say, well, I'm not going to do this, right? It's a regulatory requirement. We're having to abide by some of these new permit requirements. And so that is what we're looking at in terms of those particular costs for the wastewater treatment plant. There are also some collection system improvements in there at about, $3 million, again, just to repair and replace and renew the system, just to make sure that it's in good repair and it's sustainable and working as appropriate. But in total for that time period, you can see there that it's about $28.7 million in terms of what we're looking at for that period. Now, when we look at those capital costs, what we say is, well, what are the funding? And so the table on the left, the bar graph, really shows how those costs are coming in and what the expected time frame, that the best of our ability today, what that looks like. And so then the green, you can see those are the wastewater treatment plant costs. The yellow, which are very small in 24 through 26, a little bit more in 2027, are more of the collection type costs. And so the significant burden that the wastewater utility has is really being able to construct and fund those particular wastewater treatment plant costs. And when we talk about that, it's pretty daunting to think about, $28 million and part of that, gosh, about 90% of that being related to this wastewater treatment plant. But there are also some funding sources that the city has been able to secure. And when I looked at those funding sources compared to what a lot of other communities get, it was pretty impressive in terms of, you could really tell that the city has worked very hard to get additional funding in order to contribute to this. It's about, I think it's closer to 70% of that project is being funded by external sources. Again, still daunting at the amount that you all have to come up with, but pretty impressive in terms of the amount of external funding that you received. And it's kind of listed there in the check marks there. You have 9 million loan, of course, but you have a loan of 6 million. That's a loan forgiveness. You have direct congressional spending of another million, a little over $1 million. The ARPA, from Marion County, $1 million, state of Oregon, 9 million. And then we luckily have some cash reserves to be able to contribute towards that. So again, it was a big overwhelming thing to look at, okay, well, how are we going to be able to fund these particular wastewater treatment plants? And again, it's a daunting number, but you've done a great job of securing those external sources for sure. And so we work all of those things together. We say, here's our costs. Here's our external funding that we know we're getting from external sources. What do we need? What is left over? And then how do we then contribute to that leftover amount? And so as you can see there, we are using cash reserves, some cash reserves in there. And we're also securing that loan, the USDA loan, for about $9 million. When we put all the pieces together in terms of, well, how do we set rates? And when we put all the pieces together, what really impacts rates? It's kind of this bar chart here. And we have 2024 through 2030. The blue are your operating costs. And so again, that's the budgetary type of a cost that you just need to keep the utility going. You can see it's pretty flat. It just increases slightly with inflation from 24 to 27, but then you see the big jump in 2028. That is the additional operating and maintenance cost related to that treatment plant that you see there. Okay, so that's kind of now you're starting to see, okay, where are we working towards? What's that peak that we're needing to be able to kind of smooth out? Along with that, you can see again, is the orange is your existing debt service. And so your current revenue without using any fund balance right now, you're just slightly below. You're maybe about $150,000 below annually, but you have fund balance that you could use towards that. Then that's one-time revenue that we want to be careful with, because once that's depleted, it's gone. And so we want the rates to be able to support that ongoing revenue. And so again, you're almost there. You're slightly deficient in terms of ongoing revenue, but really what we're working for is that 2028 peak. How do we take what is going to be expected in that year and then try to smooth that out if possible? How do we implement the rates that's going to support that? Because ultimately we want that black line to be at the top of all of those bars. Okay. Again, the rate pressure is really coming from the O&M for the new wastewater treatment plant and the new debt service that is required on that $9 million. Again, a very good interest rate. I think it's 2%, slightly over 2%, 40 years, I think it was. And so it's about $336,000 per year. But it's a new obligation that we're having to look at. And so again, the question becomes, how do we then get that black line to the top of that particular bar with the yellow, knowing that we're going to kind of meet that in the 2028 time period? So a couple options that we came up with, and there are probably more scenarios than you could even think about in terms of what various different options do we have in order to meet those needs. The first option when having discussions is, well, do we want to continue to increase rates year over year until 2028? They're probably going to be double-digit increases, or do you rip the Band-Aid off immediately? And so we wanted to provide you kind of the bookends of what some of that might look like. The first one, the high bookend in terms of, okay, let's just get it done today. I want to be done with this. Over. I know it's coming. Let's just rip it off. That would require about a 60% increase. And then just to continue to maintain inflationary increases, it'd be about 3% per year. So you can see your existing rate for a single family user of domestic use, I think it's called the single family domestic user, is about $58.69 today. That would increase to $93.90. And so you can see there the dollar difference down below in that table. So it's about $35. And then after that, it's about $3 per year in terms of an increase. The next option that we said is, okay, well, what if we kind of tried to smooth that out a little bit? Again, we know we're trying to get to this peak point. Could we do 30-30? Again, here 58.69, that would go to 76.30 or about a 17.60 increase, followed by about a $23 increase. And then you get to the $2 to the $3. Now, the interesting point, if you look at the very end 2030 rate of each of those, you can kind of see what happens with compounding interest. The sooner you increase rates, you just get the benefit of compounding, not interest, excuse me, compounding revenue. And so for the 60% increase in 2025, that rate in 2030 is about 108. When you do the 230s, again, you're slowing, so you don't have as high of a compounding revenue, it's 111, so a little higher. So the more you kind of extend it out, it actually gets a little higher on the back end in terms of the ultimate rate that ratepayer would pay. And so that's that balancing act. We have to get to a certain point, what makes sense in terms of a rate adjustment for the community in order to meet these needs. Again, highly regulatory driven in terms of having to meet some regulatory requirements for your wastewater treatment plant. Now, there are obviously a whole host of other options that are available, but we wanted to present a couple of them just to kind of give you some food for thought and to get some input in terms of what that might mean, what your thoughts are on that. And then if we need to run additional, we can do that as well. The next couple of slides really just have the actual rate. And so we wanted to show you a bill, kind of a sample bill for those two together so that it was easier to compare. This one is the one-time increase or the 60%. And so this is what your rate schedule looks like. And so we just copied that just to make sure that that we had the actual rates of what people would pay, because there are commercial, industrial, and various different other users on your system. And then the next one there is the increase over 2 years. Slight differences there. So with that, again, wanted to kind of start the conversation, present to you what we have been working on for these last several months in terms of the overall financial plan. So again, this is a 20-year plan looking at what your operating and capital needs are and, where are we today versus where might we need to be in the future, and how do we navigate that and make the best decisions possible in terms of being able to fund those overall obligations. And so again, we have the 2 one-time increase and the phase increase over 2 years. And so again, we can look at running some additional rate strategy scenarios if there's interest or need. I do caution, sometimes you can get on scenario overload, and if you have 10 scenarios, then everybody just gets lost. So we do sometimes like to have the bookends just to kind of get an idea of what the range is, because somewhere in between is sometimes where you might, fall. And again, these fees are likely not to be adopted until the 2025 fiscal year time period. So with that, open it up. Yes.
So I guess I probably should have introduced Angie, but I'm glad I didn't, because she's very impressive. And I think she did a much better job in her presentation. I would have just messed up the introduction, but I do want to just point out a couple of things when we're talking about scenarios. One is we're using a base engineering cost at the time we developed a capital facilities plan. And just council should just keep in mind for the discussion that until we actually go out to bid, we don't know what those numbers are. We have to base our work on the current information that we have, and currently that's the best numbers we have. Otherwise, it's just more hypotheticals. There's a couple of things that we did, however, as part of our work with FCS, is we did not include any system development charges within the rate analysis. And we didn't do that for a couple of reasons. One is we have inconsistent growth here in the city, as you know. We are expecting some development or some growth, and that may end up actually counterbalancing some of those increased costs. So we feel really good about the structure and the numbers that are coming forward, but there still are some moving pieces out there, and we may need to come back and freshen the model. And as council knows, we do our own internal modeling, but I will tell you that having somebody with industry knowledge and expertise on wastewater systems, I think the data points and assumption that Angie and FCS put into this modeling is far more accurate than we could have done. And as you can see, where we are today with rates is much more favorably than where we kind of projected ourselves a couple of years ago. It was like $150 increase or something like that. And so when we did our projections through USDA and DEQ at our one stop, I think we were around $114 increase. So we've done really, I think, just as a community, a great job at getting us here. As you can see, Angie can explain how this all fits together much more coherently than I can. Couple of other things just to keep in mind. We are looking at as you know, the end of June is our fiscal year. And we do want to make sure that we time an increase to line up. So we're looking at an April or a May implementation. And so part of the purpose tonight is to begin that conversation with the community with some very specific data points that are certainly a good base number to start, and then begin that conversation, because it's going to be a hard conversation between now and May when we actually do the implementation. So I'm going to turn it back over to Angie. I'm going to let you guys ask any questions that you may have, and we'll go from there.
Ron had mentioned, it's, so let's say you do get some system development charges in there. That's the benefit of also having this model, is that we can change that assumption in there. Okay, boy, we were a little low. Let's change that and see how that changes the plan. And so then you're able to work those and have it a very dynamic type of changing model for you all as you're going through and trying to figure out where are we going to end up in terms of these costs.
Have to say, I'm really pleased that it's $35. Not 300 like we were afraid of. And that's a lot to do with getting the funds from the state.
I think we were looking at we were guessing a $60 to $70 increase. This is 35 and some odd cents.
What does it look like if you do 20, 20, and 20 instead of 2 years, just doing it 20% a year for 3 years?
You can definitely look at that. I actually ran one that did more like a 16. You could do it. You could do that and it'd be at about 16. I didn't run the full detailed rates with that. But you're probably going to be a little bit higher. As we said, unfortunately, when you kind of do this staggered, slower increase, it ends up being a little bit higher on the back end. The front end would be softer, but the back end is where you'll end up catching up with the overall cost.
So one more question too. Under cash city reserves,
Yeah.
there's not an amount there. Do we know what that's going to be and how that would affect, or how much we have?
In terms of how much.
It says
we have to contribute.
8%, but that doesn't tell me.
But we were having to use, in terms of cash reserves, to help meet the need after all those external funding, about 2.4 million. And that was from operating SVC and sewer improvement funds. I did a little bit of combination.
I have thoughts, but I would love to hear everyone else's thoughts before I interject my own.
Even though it's a larger increase up front, I honestly think it's easier to do that and keep it lower at the back end if we can. Because there could still be other things that come in that can still make it lower than that.
Doug, what-
I can speak to that just a little bit. And of course, this is strictly up to council, but I will just say from a standpoint of dealing with the public at the counter, you've always got an influx of new people. And it's easy. It would be much easier to, I think, explain the one-time adjustment than the ongoing adjustment for a large capital facilities, at least at the staff level. We have people that come in, even though we send out, all the information on our just inflationary increase, and we have to kind of go through and itemize what each of those adjustments are for each time. So that's, there's a lot to do there. Plus, at the end of the day, the cost is higher. So if you can do it up front, it's cheaper. Now, we could have that conversation as part of our communication with the community, where, maybe where would you like to see it, and get some of that feedback from the community. Would you like to see an overall $2 or $3 more increase if we can break it up into payments, or would you rather have it just do it and get it over with type conversation? So I think that's great feedback for us to be able to develop over the next few months. But on the back end, on the staff end, multiple increases are a little bit more work.
Yeah.
Can we,
I agree that the ripping the Band-Aid off might be okay for some of us, but I think a lot of people might appreciate time to that increase in there.
I've been working with them for several years about what this increase could be and that it would be coming in 25. So
Yeah,
this
that's-
is a lot smaller.
I'm just thinking of their actual budget, what they actually have to spend. The more time you can give them to kind of build up to that and budget for that, or cut someplace else for that, would be.
Scott, you were gonna say something?
So as everybody here has been very aware of my opinion on this utility bill increase over the years, it's becoming very concerning for me now. At what point do we stop increasing the water bill? When I first moved here, my water bill was just a little over $90 a month. And now we're here in 2024 and I'm paying what everybody else is paying, but are we gonna stop increasing when it comes to $500 a month for a water bill, sewer bill?
Unfortunately, we were required to actually cover the costs, Scott. So whatever the costs are. is
I get
what our
it, but
bill
it was your
bill-
administration that didn't freaking act on this
not my
water treatment
administration.
facility.
I wasn't
So-
on council when that came up.
Okay, well, then it was before you. So regardless, now we were being punished because a previous administration did not act on this, and now the rest of us are being suffered. So at what point do we stop increasing the water bill? Are we gonna be paying $500 a month for water bill in 2030, 2040? At what point do we stop increasing the water bill? This is getting ridiculous.
Well, I would say.
I get it that we have to pay for it at some point, but we need to start acting on it and quit freaking sitting on our legs. All right?
Well, the other part is that most of this is regulations that have changed and we're not.
The
even-
regulations were put in place 20 years ago.
Well, so we actually had an approved capital facilities plan, and it wasn't until 2018 when the Department of Environmental Quality Control came forward and basically said they would not issue a new discharge permit unless we met these new regulations. So, I think the city was implementing their capital facilities plan, albeit it was happening gradually. A lot of that was because of that type of concern that you've just voiced tonight. And it was, can we defer this? The bill's too high. Can we defer this? The bill's too high. And that's the problem. We have these regulatory requirements, and at some point they become a regulatory mandate, where there really isn't flexibility to implement over time. And that's kind of really where we ended up. And, from a utility standpoint, the cost of everything goes up. Nothing, you can't buy a car, which you could buy it for 5 years ago or 10 years ago. You can't buy a house.
And that's why I'm frustrated, because why didn't we not act on this? I know it was before you.
Well,
Clearly it was before you, but why are we having to punish our citizens? This right here,
Yep.
Aumsville, a great place to live, is gonna turn into Aumsville, an unaffordable place to live. So at what point?
Well, Scott, it was that message. It literally was that message that I took to our legislative leaders. And I basically, and that is how we got this 70% funding. It was, I literally sat in front of our legislative leaders and our federal leaders and said, if we don't go help, we're gonna be a ghost town because we can't afford it.
We're going towards a ghost town.
Unfortunately, I believe our previous leaders did not have the foresight to think innovatively. Am I saying that word correctly? You know,
Independently?
like, right? They weren't able to think past what, or they didn't. I don't know. We're not them. But it was that message. It was that message of what the hell are we gonna do? How are we gonna live? Right? I have a good job, and the idea of paying $300 and $400 water bills sickens me. Like I'm looking at this and it hurts my heart because I know there's people that $35 increase, that $35 increase is going to cause them to go to sit to ask for money to pay their water bill. It's going to cause them to go to DHS to ask them. It's going to have an impact on our churches. This increase is so much more than just pain and inflation. We can't fix the past. We were always going to have to deal with inflation. Always have to deal with the inflation.
But
And
30%,
that's not inflation. That is us having to pick up the shit from previous leadership. Yeah, you
Well,
did. It's horrible.
And one
It's
of the
sickening.
things that we're doing at the staff level that we thought would be great for part of the discussion and maybe a tool that you might be able to use in your discussions with the community is we actually have a project where we're looking at utility rates across every city in the state and then comparing our utility rate. Now, there was a previous survey done. We're actually doing this in-house. There was one done by LOC, I think back in 2018 or 19. And I haven't been able to locate that one. Plus, it's several years old. But when I looked at that one back in 2018, 19, we were at the bottom center of utility rates around the state. Meaning, if you took the middle, if you high to low and went in the middle, we were well below the middle somewhere. And we've got about a half a study done in-house, and we're tracking about the same. And so not that in of itself, we want to say, well, you know, other people have higher rates, but we want to let folks know that it's that the increase in rate isn't because city's mismanaged or you know, there's other issues happening. The increase in rates is just what everybody who operates the utility has to deal with. And it's O&M, it's regulatory mandates that have changed. And that spurs new capital improvement requirements. It's all of those things. And there's cities out there, we have it in our graph right now that have $250 utility costs. And we're not them. We're talking about you know, something that's closer to the 141, 150 range, which it would be great if that was less. But it's not certainly not the highest in the state. We're still somewhere middle low compared to, and we'll have that data for you in a spreadsheet, and we'll bring that forward so you actually got the numbers and can dissect those ourselves. I do want to talk about messaging though for the community, and I understand anytime costs go up, we've got to go through this period of wrestling with those things. But look at what we've done together as a community with this challenge. This was laid on us at a time where we were still struggling financially to provide some sort of sustainability to city government and operations. And where we are today is a far cry from where we were when we began this venture. And it was because we worked with our community members, our elected officials, staff, counterparts at state agencies, It's a remarkable thing and somewhat unheard of that we've got 70% of this proposed project funded, and it was because of that partnership. And I think the way we carry that message forward to our community is important. And it's the difference between our community saying we all did a great job and we wish it was different, but we understand where we are today. Or, not digesting this win, it is a win. And we should make sure that our messaging is positive. That's just my opinion.
I think having to explain the community, even though we did something great, it should have been done 10 years ago, is a bitter pill for them to swallow. And that's,
But see,
no, I'm just saying, like, I understand, and I don't want to minimize all the work we did because I was waking up at 5:30 in the morning to
but
have
we didn't
breakfast.
even have this requirement until 2019. You all were in office.
No, I'm just saying, like, back when they were whatever permissions they were saying, you don't have to do it right now, you don't have to do it right now, right? Obviously, they knew that something was coming down the road. Whether they communicated that to the city or not, I don't know. We weren't in office. A lot of this happened before, I think even before you.
They did increase rates some to start building that capital. That's where we got the 2.4 from.
Yeah.
So-
Yeah.
Well, and I would also say, had we implemented everything that was in that capital facilities plan, that would have been throwaway. Those projects would have not addressed the issue that we're required to address today. And so we would be carrying debt for something we would have torn out and rebuilt. So, I mean, you can look at it good and bad,
I
but
think that,
I just think the messaging going forward, we've done a remarkable thing as a group here, as a city, in partnership with our residents. How we convey that is important.
I just want to say one more thing. I completely agree with what Scott said. But I also see that we're gonna have to increase. But my hope is that we can increase slowly and we can present a plan so that we can see when it's gonna stop. When do we think we're gonna be there? And maybe the plan to be there and stop means we have to cut someplace else. Something else has to go so that we can stop increasing water rates.
The problem is
Whatever we
those
call
are
it. Let me just
utilities.
finish for 1
Yeah,
second.
but
If we can present a plan and if we can gradually increase it and we can actually present a plan, I mean, that actually gives them some ownership in what's going on in the city instead of just being told, I do this, we gotta do this, we got.
But you have to remember that those are utilities and they're standalone funds. We cannot use general funds from the city to pay for those.
Well, we're
Mhm.
using reserve funds.
Those are
They're from
derived
the
from the utility.
utilities, yeah. They're not from
Those
general
are
fund, it's from the
utility
actual.
reserve funds. If you go back in your budget and look, you will see them.
I want to,
They're set aside.
I think there's gotta be other things that we can do.
I want to give some perspective. I think we have a couple options, right? We are elected into these positions to make these decisions, but that mindset had half the city council removed a few years ago. In my opinion, I would rather do it quickly because it's going to have, in the long run, the bill will be shorter, right? That interest. But I also believe that we have done such a good job communicating with the town. I value their feedback. This is what we did. I think Ron is right. That message that we carry and the way that we present it. If I walk door to door and say, hey, we did such a good job, it's only $35. I think I'm gonna get a lot of FUs and door shit in my face. So, I think it's important to get that feedback and have that slide, right? That one that breaks it down. This is the 2-year, this is the slowly, and we have a couple months to do that. And whatever that looks like, whatever messaging that is to get that feedback, it's going to take all of us. It's going to take all of us. It's going to take town halls. It's going to take Zoom meetings. It's going to take word of mouth. And there's always going to be that one person that says, you didn't tell me. For me, if I have these conversations with people, I'm gonna let them know, this is my idea, this is what I think is gonna be better, but ultimately I want your opinion. I think that will probably be the most favorable message. We will never get away from inflation, ever. We're always gonna have to adjust inflation. I do think, and I hate to bring it up because I come from a law enforcement background, but I do think we're gonna have to look at that. It's attached to our water bill and people don't look at it separately. They look at it as one bill. We have police officer spots that we can't fill. And it breaks my heart because we're looking at taking away something that protects our town. But it's something that we as a council really need to think and look at because that $12 could really impact somebody's life. So we're gonna have some hard decisions that we need to talk about. And we're gonna need the town's input. That is what I have to say about this. And I really want to hear from every single one of you.
So just keep in mind, council, we're not asking for a decision tonight. This was just the conversation starter. So we had, we had a number that we could start to discuss. And my suggestion, based on the discussion that I've heard tonight from council, is this is maybe we should convene a work session and kind of talk about some of the different scenarios, talk about messaging and vehicles of delivering those messages. And maybe develop a plan to kind of roll this out a little bit more comprehensively. And then go from there. Typically, we would deliver this information in a work session just because of the type of conversation that it invoked. But one of the things that we're really trying to be aware of, at least at the conversation starter, is that transparency and trust issue with the community that I know council was really concerned about. And so we decided to do this in just a presentation format, but to really work on some of the technical aspects of our messaging, I think a work session might be a good next step if you're okay with that. And if we have additional input, we can provide FCS. They're happy to work that into the model. They're on board now. So, we can have them do different scenarios, but the job that they did, identifying the operations and the debt and what we would need through financing, I think they did a stellar job, and I think we've got some really good foundation numbers here.
I think it was a good discussion. And that was my point. If we can add something to it, we can take something away from it.
Thank you, thank you. All right, moving on. Is there any member of the audience that or on Zoom for public comment? None? Okay. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
I move to approve the consent agenda as presented.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. The consent agenda is approved. Moving on to number 4, there are no public hearings tonight. Number 5, the open city councilor position. So we have a few options on this. We need to discuss. I made phone calls. For some reason, I lost track of 2 weeks. I thought city council was next
Gone.
week. I did end up working both, like I work too much. I think that's the problem. So my days ran in together. I don't know if anyone else was able to call anybody, Katie. We have both the applicants here tonight. So I'm open to suggestions on how you guys want to go about this. A vote or what?
Just make a nomination. Just make it.
You guys want to talk to them before we, or just go ahead and,
Talked last meeting we had and they both showed up. They probably have expectations, I think. Due diligence to make a selection.
Agree.
all right? We would need, do we need a motion on that, or we just go ahead and do that?
The motion to appoint.
Okay, so the way it would go is if there's somebody that you want to appoint, you make a motion to appoint that person, and then there would be a second. If there is no second, it dies. When there's a second, we vote. If you don't wish to appoint that person, you save it for the next. Then the next person would make a motion to appoint. There would be a second, and we vote. Does that make sense?
I move to appoint Greg Hudson.
I second. All those in appointing Greg Hudson for the open position of city council? Do you want to say aye, raise your hand? Say aye. 3? Yes, I'm calling for it. Okay, all those in favor of appointing Greg for the open city councilor position? Say aye.
Aye.
Aye. So that is 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, that is a majority. So Greg Hudson is appointed as city council. Phyllis, thank you for your application. I did enjoy our conversation today. I did ask Phyllis if she would be interested in the planning commission and she turned it down. But I want you to know, Phyllis, if you change your mind, I do think you are very qualified for that. And I was hoping that I was hoping either one of you would accept it, if not appointed tonight.
I
So-
did it for a long time before I came.
You can reach out to the city anytime. Your application and our conversation is always going to be in the back of my head. What do we want to do tonight, Ron? Do we,
Well, we can go ahead and administer the oath of office, if you would like, although, we will have an orientation, scheduled with Greg and we'll go through that process. And he'll sit in it. He can come up or he can wait for the orientation. There's really no business left on the agenda, but we could do the oath of office and get him officially sworn in tonight.
Greg, do you have family that you want to invite to the oath of office? I mean, no, I mean, if you want to, that's,
Do it at the next meeting.
shall we do it? We don't have any more business. Ron's gonna give his report and we could do it next meeting.
Right at the beginning.
Yeah, right at the beginning. Yes. Kind of worth my face. Moving on to new business. There is no new business. Ron, your report?
Well, since this is the second council meeting of the month, I really don't have a lengthy report. Just a couple of things. We did have a pretty lengthy meeting on Thursday. Most of the council attended, along with planning commission members. And were debriefed on several new legislative actions that occurred this year. And what some of the cause and effect of those actions could be. It's interesting because some of those bills haven't went through rulemaking and probably won't go through rulemaking at the administrative level until after they're required or implemented on the cities. So it's somewhat of a moving target and we're guessing to some extent, but we're trying to prepare as best we can for those things. 1537, Senate Bill 1537 was the one I think was the most significant that had, it's the housing affordability bill that came forward that has a lot of land use implications to it. And then there's some new FEMA requirements that are dropping the 1st of December. We're trying to wade our way through what does that mean and how does that affect our wastewater treatment facility, which is located in the floodplain. And is there anything we need to do to prepare for that? We've done a lot of that. We've done all of our NEPA work. We've done on-site surveys. We've done all the internal land use compatibility statements and things like that. But is there anything in that process that could negatively affect us? And we're still trying to work our way through some of the details of that. So, we're constantly working our way through some of these issues. As you know, you approved a water conservation plan, which is required by the state for systems our size. We have the draft back. We're sending that out for area agencies to comment on, and we'll give you a preview of that at the next council meeting. All exciting stuff, I know. But we're looking pretty good. I think the plan came out better than we expected as far as our system usage, across residents. We're actually doing pretty good. And based on the analysis, our lost water or undercaptured water is much lower than we thought it was. And so that's pretty good through that plan. So other than that, we did have some staff changes at City Hall. We're in the process of interviewing for an open position there. If you have any questions, I guess I could just perhaps.
I did just realize something that might be relevant, since we're talking about the oath of office. The next meeting would be October 14th. That is Columbus Day. So if you want to mention that.
Yes, that's what you and I discussed in your office a couple weeks ago. We were all day, we were like, what was that item?
Oh, yeah, right, yes.
That's what the
Yeah,
item
that
was.
was the Yeah.
So yes, you're gonna fall on a holiday. I'm wondering if maybe Tuesday is the 15th, Wednesday, we all go to LOC, or those who are attending LOC. I'm wondering if maybe that work session on Tuesday or
On the 15th?
on the 15th, we'll send out an email and just look at availability. And I think it would be good to have just an open conversation about costs, look at our budget again, and just refresh ourselves with that conversation about how the budget works and what's in the budget for those utilities and what's not. Keep in mind, this analysis is taking our current budget methodology and utilizing that. So, there's not a lot there in that budget. It's a very small utility. But we can have some more in-depth conversations about that. But if you have other questions, I'm happy to answer those.
I don't have my schedule with me, but I do have some mandatory shifts that run into the evening. That's why I wasn't at the last meeting. So as soon as, I'll go home and look at them and email them to you tonight. So I think there's
It's a holiday.
a total of 8 political shifts I have to do for work, and they're all in the evening. So between now and election day. But depending on where that lands, I believe the majority of them are Tuesday and Thursdays. So there's a couple Tuesdays and Thursdays that I left open. So I'll send those over to Chris.
No meeting on the 14th.
Well, I think we should, it's a holiday. I'm happy to come in, but
Just want to clarify so we know if we
Yeah.
have to come or not.
yeah, we should probably go ahead and just because we're not going to have staff support, let's plan to cancel that. We're going to notice LOC because we'll all be at the LOC conference down there.
We have volunteers for the pumpkin day. We're gonna be at LOC conference.
What day was?
The 19th?
Patch?
Yes, the night.
It's that Saturday, right?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the Saturday after LOC or
No.
before?
The Saturday
During.
of. Do we
Uh,
have,
Of LOC, okay. If you're back, if you're back, you're welcome.
I don't think we're gonna
I think
be-
I think you or Della would be our voting delegate if you wanted to stay for the business meeting on Saturday, but the rest of the council doesn't have to stay for Saturday.
Okay.
There's,
It's over at noon, right?
What time is
it's
the-
over at
I just-
noon,
yeah.
but I think they just have like a morning speaker. It's not a class or anything, and then they do the business meeting.
And the dinner
Your
is,
breakfast with the speaker at the breakfast,
Okay.
and the dinner is Friday night.
Friday night.
Friday night is the awards dinner, yeah.
Then we should go up to dinner Thursday.
All right, is there anything else? Ron?
So, could we get a motion to cancel the meeting on the 14th, just so that we've got a clear?
All right,
I move to approve canceling the October 14th meeting as it's a federal holiday.
all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye, motion passes.
So will we have a meeting in October at all then? 20?
The second meeting in October is still a good date. So yes, we will meet the second meeting in October.
That's the 28th.
If we can get everybody together for a work session, we might talk about that water conservation plan and then more discussion on how we message our wastewater increase to the community. We've got some ideas. We might even put some samples or examples together for council.
I remember standing up in front of the LLC when we did that class and said, nobody wants to be in an elected position when the water bill goes up to $300. And boy, do I feel that right now. Okay, so moving on, mayor and councilor reports. Does anyone have anything to report?
MWAC didn't meet this month because of the first of the month being holiday and people being gone, and SCATS is tomorrow.
That's us tomorrow.
Yep.
I did have a Zoom meeting with Senator Merkley's office. We talked about some of the challenges that we might be facing with the Build America Back requirements. There's just a lot of variables. They have offered support. So there isn't anything to report back right now other than we are aware that there might be some hiccups and we're having contingency plans, A, B, C, and D. Ron's really good about doing that. I did get an email from the school. There is a family picnic day this Friday. The lunches start at 11:10 and it goes through 11 or 12:30. I'm gonna try to be there. I have a 12 o'clock appointment, so I can probably be there the first half. If you guys are interested in coming from like 12 to 12:30. The kids love seeing us. It doesn't matter. They think we're superheroes. This Friday?
May 7th.
Yeah, I also have an event on Thursday evening that I'll be at. Community Resources putting on.
Oh, and I went and spoke with seniors. Was it last week before?
I think it was like before.
It
think
was
it
after city
was.
council, like, again, I lost a week somewhere. Senior class, it was really interesting. It was great. I did ask for feedback on, this is the next generation. People are gonna be voting. Out of that whole 30 kids, only one is planning to become a registered voter, which is a little sad. So I asked them, what can we do as leaders to get you motivated? And what kind of things, like, if you think about Aumsville being a town that you want to leave as a child, but come back home and raise your kids, what would bring you back? And I encourage them to reach out and bring those ideas forward as they see. I do plan on running I just got an email, the If I Were Mayor contest. Hopefully, we've learned some things from last year. Staten and Sublimity are interested in collaborating again. I haven't heard back from Turner, but we will probably include Turner. I just want to make you guys aware. We can come up with some different prizes besides gift cards. But it is an OMA thing, but I really enjoy bringing the council and the city staff into it. There anything for the good of the order? We received no correspondence and we have no executive session. So what time is it? I will go ahead and call the meeting closed at 8:01 p.m.